If you would analyze most of the reports, the basic calculations that we do on the report is either we sum some things, like in our case the sales amount, or we calculate how many things, how many times something happened, and this is usually just counting. I'm talking about it because the two basic reporting formulas that we start with are COUNTIF and the SUMIF formulas, and they are used in this kind of scenarios where either you would like to count how many things you have or calculate the sum, but based on a condition. Let's start with the first one, which is COUNTIF. And you will see that you have only two arguments. The first one, what is the range, and the second one, what are the criteria. So in our case, we are looking for the producer. So the range might be either B2 to B48, or we can also select the whole B column, it doesn't matter. And as the criteria, we just select the producer's name, and when we hit enter, we can see that this producer has 9 rows in our table. We would like to copy now the formula to the right, so we need to freeze the column that we are tied to, and when we move it to the right, we will see different numbers for different producers. What is the difference between COUNTIF and SUMIF? We start exactly the same, so we say let's look for the producer, let's insert the producer's name, but then we have the third argument, which is the column that we will sum, and when we select the column in the same manner as the first argument, we can hit enter and calculate the sums for this particular producer. Once again, we need to use F4 shortcut to block the address, and we can calculate the sum for the other producers. There are many different approaches to create the condition within both of the formulas, and we will now investigate some of the options we have. So let's start with the first example, where we would like to count how many rows we have in the table. So I will just select the tables I can see in the table, and they should be different than smartphone, because we don't have a cell that contains the condition now. We need to apply this condition inside a text as the second argument. And by doing so, you can see that we obtain the end result. If we have conditions that contain numbers, we need to apply this exactly the same. So COUNTIF the sales amount column, and the criteria is less than or equal to 120. This is once again placed into quotes, and we get the end result. A bit more difficult, the year 2009. We don't have this year. We don't want to use any of the array formulas available in Excel 365. So the easiest way is to just create a new column with year based on the data we have. Then we have a plain column in here, and we can calculate now if the data in this column is equal to 2009. And since this is just a number, we can avoid using the brackets, and we will obtain the result. Now let's check whether the sales value is negative. So once again, COUNTIF, we will apply this to sales amount, and it should be less than 0. Next, we'll check if the product ID is equal 1014. So this is a simple scenario, and actually we have a choice, which means we can either define the second argument as just the number, and we can see that it works. But if we would quotes in here, the result will be exactly the same. Next scenarios are more complex, because we would like to check just part of the text that we can find in there. For example, if we would start looking for the product ID in here that starts with 104, we could actually use the asterisk But since this is a number, it will be hard for Excel to operate on that. So the easiest way to do it is to create another ID as a text, and we can use in here, for example, the text formula, take the value and apply there the text format, which in our case might be just an @ sign. We get the full text in here, and then we can apply this formula to the newly created column, and we will see that it works. Now it's time for the contain scenario, where the beginning of the exercise is exactly the same, and we will use already the text column in here, and it should contain 03 inside. So we start with the quote, then the asterisk as anything, then 03, and then the asterisk at the end. We close the quote and close the bracket. If we want to count the 3-digit product ID, we need to apply the question marks, which means let's count if in this column with products we have 3 question marks, close the quote and close the brackets. Let's check that. If we would change it to 102, we can see that it's a 3-digit now. We can use also the date formula in the last argument of the COUNTIF formula. So if we are looking for the dates which are today, we can just use the today formula, keep in mind closing the bracket, and we close the bracket of the whole formula, and we can see that there is one row existing in here. And the last one, the sales should be greater than the average sales. So once again, we use the COUNTIF, we select the column with the sales, and then as the criteria, it should be greater than concatenation with the formula average of this sales amount, and we double close the bracket and we get the result. And all of the sum ifs that we are supposed to write later are exactly the same, except for the fact that the sum if formula should be applied, and that we need always the third argument, which is the sales amount. So in each of the formulas we need to apply the same logic and use always the D column. However, there are exceptions in this rule, because if we would like to apply the condition directly on the D column, which is the sales amount, we don't need to repeat it in the third argument, which means for the values equal to or below 120, it's enough to place the sales amount in the first argument, the same for the negative sales value, and also the same for the sales greater than H8 column.